Right. Well, welcome aboard. It is getting closer to Christmas, which means that many of you are about to head off to turf for your final exciting trip to make things happen and win some contests. Remember, you just need 15 cards for the month for you guys who go to turf. And then you can win stuff like a dinner for two. And hopefully if you save that dinner for leads, you can take me out, which is one of my goals. All right. Or you can win a technical suit if you get even more. I think it's 40 floats if you're going to turf. Everybody else, 100 floats with phone numbers for the month. So I think that's an exciting contest. I would encourage you to win. All right. Along with the contest, let me also encourage you that if you're coming to Leeds to that meeting, I want you to do this. I'm giving you an assignment from me and Katrin and Dimitri for extra weight. We want you to start thinking about your goals for 2018 and beyond. So as you fly, as you have some time on trains and such, start to make a note of some goals. So that's going to be your assignment. If you bring your goals to Leeds, then you will be way ahead of the game, because we're going to work on some goal setting exercises while you're there. So you won't be starting from scratch. All right. So on to material. Let's talk today about one of John Maxwell's 21 Laws of Leadership. Who's up for that? Excellent. If you didn't raise your hand, I'm sorry. That's what I'm going to deliver. We're going to talk about law number 17 out of 21, which means we've just got a few left. But law number 17 is the law of priorities. Priorities. So make a note of that. And because I've noticed that some of my calls are sort of amorphous and difficult to take notes with, I will tell you when to take notes. All right. Today, I'm going to give you 6 big thoughts. All right. So 6, that's the number in your head. First big thought from John Maxwell. Leaders understand that activity is not accomplishment. Boom! How about that? Leaders like yourselves understand that activity is not necessarily accomplishment. So on all these calls, I have to kind of bifurcate the talk. Bifurcate means to split into 2. So Maxwell talks about leaders having priorities, and then you guys as salespeople and also leaders have priorities. So I'll try to hit both categories. So here's the good news. Everyone has the same number of hours in a given week. We all have, if you do the math, we all have 168 hours every week of our lives. So it's what you do with those hours that makes a huge difference, right? Yes, nod your head. That's correct. And so good leaders have a bias for action. And leaders also love activity. You don't see a lot of leaders just kind of hanging out on the couch all the time, eating potato chips. I mean, that's appropriate sometimes, but most leaders, they want to make things happen. But the question is, what are they accomplishing? And what are you accomplishing? Big question here. Are you busy? Are you effective? Which is it? Busy or effective? There are tons of salespeople I know beyond LGFG who work really hard. They are very active, but they are not results oriented, right? And I don't know if you guys, I know I have, but have you ever had a day when you finished, but you hadn't really accomplished anything that you wanted? Who's had a day like that? Yes. I mean, you were busy, you were doing stuff, but it wasn't oriented toward good priorities. So I don't know if you've ever been active in filling your calendar, but you ended up just filling it with clients who didn't have a high payoff. Lots of info sessions, lots of cancellations, but your calendar looked quite full and active. So here's another big thought besides the first one I gave you. Don't confuse activity with results. Don't confuse activity with results. Not everybody has the same resources. Not everybody is as talented, but everyone has the same amount of time. So we have to make choices about priorities. Now, some years ago, I read an interesting pamphlet called The Tyranny of the Urgent. The Tyranny of the Urgent. And it was all about how little things can just sap your time. Have you ever noticed that? Just little tons of important little things that all start to, answering emails, returning phone calls, dealing with things that aren't mission critical. They can remove all your critical time. They can take away from your golden hours. It's what Stephen Covey calls the thick of thin things. The thick of thin things. So there's so many little things demanding your time. That's what the tyranny of the urgent is. This is urgent. This is urgent. There's a crisis. I got to put out this fire. And so you become a great fireman, but not a great effective leader. So this isn't a big thought, but I think it's interesting. You may want to write it down. So Maxwell says this: the question is not, will your calendar be full as you work, but who will fill your calendar? Yes, grasshopper. It's not, will your calendar fill up with stuff to do, but who will fill your calendar? And as Demi talked about on a call last week, I really liked it. He said your life schedule affects everything. Remember when he said that? Your life schedule, what you choose to do and how you prioritize your life affects everything. I thought that was pretty important. And your circle of influence, who you surround yourself with, that's really key. Who are you spending your time with? Even when you're in turf, who are you spending your time with? With buyers? With A players? With ballers? Or, sometimes when you get a little desperate, you know how that feeling is? I haven't booked anybody. And then you kind of book people, they agree, but they're not really qualified buyers. And then you end up, once you get to turf, the calendar looks okay, but once you get to turf, you're like, oh my gosh, info sessions, cancellations. So you've confused activity with results when you're making your calls from the office. Okay, so let me share a couple thoughts about time too, because priorities make me think about time. There are 3 or 4 types of time. One is boss imposed time. If you're at work and somebody from your chain of command above you calls, then that is time that's imposed on you. That's boss imposed time. You also have another kind of time. That is what I call subordinate imposed time. So if you're one of the partners, or if you're a leader in the office, part of your job, hopefully, is to train new people who are coming on board. That's subordinate imposed time. Those are some new people who have lots of questions, like, what do I do with this? And hey, I've got a question about this type of client. So that's subordinate imposed time. There's also customer imposed time, right? If you got an upset customer, my measurements were off, these pant legs were too skinny, whatever, you've got to deal with them. So that's customer imposed time, right? And then you've got another type of time. You've got family imposed time. So if you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a husband or a wife or a family or kids, or those hopefully should take up part of your time in your calendar also. So there's different types of time. I know when I was at Southwestern working there, and what happens as you work up in a company, you reach a ceiling of complexity. We'll talk about this again, where you were doing so many things, so many projects, so many activities, so many clients to deal with, that you bump up against a ceiling of complexity. And the only way to break through that is to change your paradigm and change how you're approaching things. I bumped up against that because I reached a point where I was traveling so much that I was missing ball games with my kids and some of the activities and sports that they were involved with. And so I said, oh, you know what? I've got to change my paradigm. I've got a priority. My family's a priority. So I decided I would do unheard of things. I would take my family with me, or one kid at a time, to different weekend meetings and trips I went on. Whenever I traveled, somebody was with me. So that was just a priority for me, is I didn't want to have the job versus life, always doing this, okay? So think of different ways to handle your types of time. So if you prioritize it correctly on all this stuff, you get a great return. If you set your priorities right, it's a good move. If you try to chase, have you ever tried to chase several rabbits at once? No, you haven't, but it's a good visual. There go the rabbits, and you try to chase them all, they scatter, and you get none. So you've got to get focused on getting the right things done at the right time. If you, instead of focusing on getting more and more and more done, a great leader, a great salesperson gets the right things done. Okay, that's a big difference. Okay, so let me give you another big thought, because some of you are like, I want to write something down. All right, here's another big thought. Maxwell says, what can you say no to? What can I say no to? Right? Because you don't want to get caught up in the thick of thin things. Bruce Lee, one of my favorite kung fu actors. Who knows Bruce Lee? Remember that? Enter the Dragon? Yeah, classic. You need to make sure you see that. He said this about priorities. I like what he said. He said, it's not a daily increase, but a daily decrease. Hack away at inessentials. He said, hack away at inessentials. What are inessentials that I do? You know, it could range from just dumb stuff like, hey, you know what? I feel like checking Facebook right now. Oh, look, I'm going to put something up on Pinterest. Whatever. Instagram, while you should be calling. Those are distractions. You got to make those decisions. All right. Let me give you another big thought. You really got to think on priorities. What gives me my greatest return? What gives me my greatest return? I liked what Rivas did a few weeks ago. He sent me some of his goals, and he had a whole section on non-negotiables. These are my non-negotiables. This is crap I'm not going to put up with, or these are things I'm 100% committed to. So one big thought that can really help you is something that Demi mentioned in one of his calls. We've mentioned it before, the Pareto principle, the 20-80 rule. Remember the Pareto principle? Created, discovered, invented by an Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto. So he named it after himself, being very much into himself, evidently. The 80-20 rule. It says, and the thing, here's the deal. You don't have to do a lot. The Pareto principle says you just have to do the critical things. So this is not just true for to-do lists. Prioritize, you know, if you just prioritize your to-do list, it's also true for clients. It works like this. 20% of your clients will account for 80% of your sales, roughly, if you look at it. 80-20, just think 80-20. 80% of my problems when I ran sales organizations came from 20% of the people, right? Think about it. 20% of my investments, I just met with my Merrill Lynch guy last week. Deb and I sat down with him to look at how our stocks and investments had grown over the years. And I didn't study it intensely, but about 20% of the investments account for 80% of our wealth. Something to think about. Now, years ago, I spent time, and this is a leadership principle. Years ago, I spent time reversing that and doing it the wrong way. I had an organization, and there were 20% of the people that were whining and complaining and creating problems, and they couldn't sell very much. So where did I pour my energy? Correct. I poured my energy into them, trying to get them up to speed, and all the top people I ignored because I thought, well, they're just doing fine, even though they were accounting for 80% of our business. Well, it didn't work out well. The organization kind of blew apart. But I learned a good lesson, and that was you need to focus on the 20% that are producing all the results. Now, that doesn't mean that you just ignore people that have problems, but you work out ways for other people to help out. So just so you know, think about 80-20. You got to prioritize your activities. You got to prioritize your clients, okay? Your top 20% of your clients contribute to probably about 80% of your business, roughly. So think about that. All right. So the idea is this. By focusing your attention on the top 20% of all your priorities, you get an 80% return on your effort. And because you can't do everything, how many of you noticed you can't do everything? Once you make these to-do lists, you're like, what in the world? I can't get to all this stuff. Here's the deal, though. If you can't do it all, but if you do the most important things first, you gain the greatest results. That is true. And then it's amazing how many of the less important things don't even need to be done, okay? Or you can delegate some of those sometimes, all right? It's never perfect, so don't expect perfection. But people ask, oh, how's it possible when the people around me want so many things from me? The deal is you gain momentum from being consistently successful at the big things that really matter. The 20% of the things that really matter, do those. And then you'll gain more and more latitude in things that are less important. That's just kind of like corporate wisdom. All right? So here is a question. Here's another big thought. I think I'm on number 5 or so. This question helped me more than ever when I was completely covered up by all kinds of stuff that were bombarding. I have so many things I got to do. I would ask myself this great priority, focusing, impact question. And it was this: what's the most important thing I should do right now? When I was feeling overwhelmed, I would ask myself, what's the most important thing I should do right now? You know, I know Sonata told me a story about her last trip when she was asking herself really different kinds of questions like that. Things weren't really falling into place. So she was thinking, what's the most important thing I need to do right now to make things happen? And boom, she did some out of the box stuff and made things happen. Right, Sonata? Nod your head. Yes, she says, that's true. It's all true. Lee's not lying. So that is a great question to ask yourself. What's the most important thing I should do right now when you're in turf? Start prioritizing. Start doing only things that matter to your success. Okay, so let me skip over some stuff that I think is boring and talk about another thought. We're going to be studying in Leeds our first little foray into the 7 habits with Stephen Covey. So, which I think is going to be deep and thoughtful and useful. But here's one priority setting strategy he suggests that if you haven't done this yet, I would encourage you to do. Take your planning time and look at don't just look at each day, like what do I need to do today? Take each block of time in a week. He says take week-long blocks of time to do your prioritizing. And ask yourself, what are my priorities for this week? Not what am I doing today, right? And he says the second part of this is important too. He says establish what are my roles, R-O-L-E-S, not R-O-L-L-S. Some of you are like, yeah, I am hungry. No, I'm talking about roles, R-O-L-E-S. So what kind of roles do I play in my life? And what are goals for those roles, right? So if you think about your roles, I know Jorgen did this. Some of you are like, well, why is Jorgen doing so well? Well, Jorgen really took some of the 7 habits that we're going to study to heart. And he figured out what are my roles and what are goals for each of those roles so I stay balanced. You know, I see salespeople that get way out of whack. You know, I used to work with university students. And so sometimes they would either be working with me at Southwestern and recruiting and doing really well and ignoring school, bad idea, getting out of balance, or plunging into school when they got behind and ignoring their work, or like forgetting to see their family or talk to them at the right time. So to maintain some balance, which we'll discuss in Leads, balance is good, priorities are good. You need to have roles and goals. And so here's my final big thought is Covey says this, which I like. He says in your life, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Did you get it? That's easy to remember. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. What's your main thing? What's your purpose? What's your mission? We talked about that in Manila. What is your main thing? What is your main driving priority? You know what I like about a lot of you? I know I got a nice picture from Gitas that showed, Dimitri talked about your physical environment. Is your physical, your goals visible? Are your priorities visible? How many of you have your goals posted where you can see them? Anybody? Raise your hand if you, all right, 3, 4, all right. Okay, this is a great idea then. Create a physical space that helps you see your priorities at all times. Real important. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So let me finish with a couple quotes. Any thoughts from you guys on priorities or how you do that? You can unmute yourselves and jump in at this point. Let me see. Most of you see adjusting your hair, trying to stay awake. Excellent. Okay. Well, let me give you a couple quotes to kind of wrap up this notion of priority. If you ever studied a great German philosopher, Goethe, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, he said this: things which matter most must never be at the mercy of things which matter least. Isn't that the challenge in life? We get those mixed up. And Covey says this, I like this, but you have to think about it. He says the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. You get it? You start with your priorities and then you schedule them. You don't start with a big to-do list and then go, okay, this is important and this is, you're going backwards. So don't prioritize what's on your schedule, schedule your priorities. And William James, whom we heard quoted in a couple of these calls, I'm going to pick, he's an American philosopher. He's dead, but he said good things. He said this: the art of being wise is the art of knowing what to overlook. The art of being wise is the art of knowing what to overlook. The real genius is knowing what not to do and really concentrating on that 20% of activities which will generate 80% of your results. Yeah? So there you go. Priority, the law of priority. I want you to think about priority. And then on your trips to Leeds, if you're headed that way, make sure that you think about some of your goals. And continue to collect business cards. Look, I have 2 as an example. So I am not winning anything at this point, but I'm going to get some more and try to eat dinner with somebody. Okay? So I wish you guys well. We're approaching the Christmas season. Lots of you are going to be heading into turf. I think we've got one more call next week with me, and then I'm going to go into heavy holiday immersion, and I hope you'll have some time off and you take that as a priority also. But let's finish strong and win. Okay? I'm signing off. Thank you. You're champions. See many of you in Leeds. Have a great week. This is Lee. I'm out.